Listening to the Everything Geek podcast.
Hey, this is Rich McDonald, and I play Commander David Mason on Call of Duty Black Ops 2. And you're listening to Everything Geek podcast.
Hello, I'm Simon Fisherbecker. You probably know me better as Dorian Moldovar from Doctor Who, or the Fat Friar from Harry Potter. And this is Everything Geek Podcast.
Your attention, masters, mistresses. All systems functional for the Everything Geek Podcast.
Hey, it's James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Master Plo Koon in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Everything Geek, the podcast.
Face it, Tiger. You just hit the jackpot with the Everything Geek podcast.
Hello everyone, this is Rory Williamson of the Everything Geek podcast, and joining me here at London Film and Comic Con is a very special guest. We have producer Gary Kurtz, best known as the producer of Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, Star Wars Episode 5 The Empire Strikes Back, The Dark Crystal, Friends and Heroes, executive producer on Return to Oz, and the co-producer on American Graffiti. Gary, how are you?
Fine. Very nice to be here.
Great. Are you enjoying the event so far?
Yes, very much. I only get to attend a few of these events around the world, and it's wonderful to be able to meet a lot of the fans that and talk with them during these events.
That's great, and I know you do a lot of the Showmasters events because you run a company with the organizer Jason Joyner. For those who aren't familiar with the Kurtz Joyner archive, do you want to talk a little bit about that before we get into your career?
All right. The archive is really just a collection of a lot of artifacts and paperwork from not only the original Star Wars films, but also a lot of other science fiction and fantasy-oriented material that we've been able to assemble over the years. We haven't yet found a venue to be able to show it, but that's in the works.
Great. I'll look forward to hearing more information on that. For our listeners who may not be familiar with your background as much, can you tell us how did you decide you wanted to become a producer?
Well, I started out in film school as a director, cameraman, and editor, and in a lot of the low-budget films that I was making with Roger Corman and other low-budget producers in the 60s, the production side was the weakest link, and I found that I could hire someone else as a cameraman who was as good or better than I was, but the production side was not so good. So I started becoming a production manager and assistant director, and then later became a producer out of that.
It's very interesting. Going on to Star Wars, you decided to leave Star Wars after being a producer on the first two films after you felt George Lucas started to become more focused on making it more upbeat and so they could make more merchandise. Looking back on it, do you have any regrets about leaving? And if you had stayed, do you think you could have convinced George to continue with the original story for Return of the Jedi?
I don't really have any regrets about leaving. I felt that the focus and the energy shifted a lot when George wanted to change the story for Return of the Jedi, and he he was the one that owned the rights and could decide to do what he wanted to do. He did want to make a more positive film, and probably after Indiana Jones decided that the audience liked the whole idea of the roller coaster ride as opposed to a heavy dramatic story.
It's very interesting. Thank you for that. Even though you ended up having no involvement with the prequels and the upcoming films, do you remember any story details you might have been told on what the prequels and sequels were originally going to be about?
Well, originally there weren't going to be any films beyond the first Star Wars film. There was a lot of notes and material that George had jotted down and that over the various drafts had created that we extracted material for the first film. So there was a lot there, random kinds of story material that could always have been used. So it was part of that was used when George made the prequels, and but there weren't any specific things aside from the fact that the whole idea of the prequels was going to be about where Darth Vader came from. That was about it. And so as far as stories beyond the end of Jedi, there was a vague idea that it would be interesting to carry Luke's character on beyond that at some point, but it wasn't really formulated at that time at all.
Okay, thanks for that information. I heard that it was you who came up with the title for The Empire Strikes Back, which is now widely considered as the best Star Wars film. Is this true, and how did you come up with the title?
Yes, I did. It was a press conference and interviews that we were doing to promote the original film, and by this time Fox had announced that they wanted to do a sequel, and so I was asked at the press conference what we were calling it, and I said I didn't like numbers on films, and so they were referring to it as Star Wars 2. And I said, no, we're not going to call it Star Wars 2. It's going to be something out of a B movie from the 50s, something like The Empire Strikes Back. So, and that just stuck.
Wow, that's very interesting. Finally, do you have any upcoming producing works or anything else coming up that you would like to talk about?
Well, I'm working on 2 films that we're developing and going into production within China, but they're not really early enough to talk about yet, but they should be in production next year.
Thank you for your time. So that was our interview with producer Gary Kurtz. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. So make sure to check out our podcast links. Check out our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/everythinggeekpodcast. Check out our YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/user/everythinggeekcast. Check us out on Twitter, twitter.com/everythinggeekp. Check us out on Instagram, instagram.com/official-everythinggeekpodcast. Check out our Mixcloud profile, www.mixcloud.com/everythinggeekpodcast. Email us at the below email, everythinggeekpodcast@gmail.com. Check out our companion podcast, Everything Geek Comic Cast, www.facebook.com/everythinggeekcomiccast. Make sure to check out the host's YouTube channels. Mine is www.youtube.com/user/Separatist Check out Gary Kurtz's list of credits on IMDb, www.imdb.com/name/nm0476030. Check out the Kurtz Joiner archive, www.kurtzjoiner